Hey guys, John V here from Phone Arena. Right now you're watching our video comparison between the Nokia Lumia 1520 and the LG G2. So the G2 has been out for a little bit now and it's proven itself to be a very strong competitor in the space. It has some great specs in tow, well-rounded performance, and of course that customized Android experience has been enhanced enough to make it a very refreshing one. On the other side of the spectrum, you have the Nokia Lumia 1520, and the cool thing about that device is that it's packing one impressive price point right from the get-go. $100 for 2-year contract. When you combine the fact that it's packing a 20 megapixel pure view camera and also some awesome specs, it's going to be a really good challenger. So bearing all that in mind, let's get started with this comparison. It's honestly tough to say which of these two designs we prefer more than the other, just because you have one that's really massive in size versus one that's more form-fitting in the hand. When it comes to construction durability, we're gonna have to go with the Lumia 1520 in this one. That's thanks to its unibody polycarbonate casing. It just doesn't have any seams in it, so it feels a lot more sturdy. Whereas with the LG G2, it has a shiny, glossy finish, which is more prone to fingerprints and smudges. It has seams, and every now and then we're gonna hear some creaking as we're holding the device. It's actually more comfortable to hold the LG G2 just because the subtle curves around its back casing, and obviously the size factor helps. It's just a lot more form-fitting in the hand. Naturally, with the Lumia 1520, it's best used with two-handed operation just because of the single hand, with its pointy corners and its wide figure. It just makes it very hefty to hold in the hand. What we have here are two gorgeous looking displays. One is just big and the other is just simply bigger. On the Lumia 1520, we have a 6-inch 1080p IPS LCD panel, which gives it a pixel density count of 368 pixels per inch. While the LG G2 packs a 5.2-inch 1080p IPS LCD panel with the smaller size display and the same resolution, it actually has the higher pixel density count of 423 pixels per inch. So even though the LG G2 on paper has the detail superiority over the Lumia 1520, honestly when we're looking at them from a normal distance, it's almost hard to distinguish actually which one is the better between the two. Seeing that both panels rely on IPS LCD technology, they have the same quality elements that we like about them. You have some great wide viewing angles, strong brightness output, superior outdoor visibility, and their color reproductions are really nice and vibrant, give them a nice glow. Ultimately though, it's going to be personal preference that's going to dictate which of these two displays is more ideal for you. Now, some people will like the larger display of the Lumia 1520, and then again, some people also like the size that we find with the G2. One of the hallmark features, of course, with the G2 is the placement of its power and volume controls. They're in the back of the device. Now, for some people, first-time users, it feels a little bit alien, whereas with the Lumia 1520, they're in an ideal spot on the right side. Now, they're both kind of a little bit flat to the touch, but at least they're responsive. They feature many of the same ports around their trims. For starters, you have their micro USB ports on the bottom edge for charging data connectivity, but the G2 you gain video out with the aid of an MHL adapter. The 3.5mm headset jack is on the bottom edge with the G2, whereas it's on the top edge on the Lumia 1520. The 1520 benefits by having a micro SD card slot to increase its storage capacity where there's none on the G2, but the G2 packs a very useful IR blaster on top edge, which essentially makes the smartphone become a universal remote. And finally, we have their cameras. On the Lumia 1520, it really stands out for its larger size sensor. It's a 20 megapixel pure view camera which features a Zeiss lens with an aperture of f2.4. It has a backside illuminated sensor and also an optical image stabilization module. The ability to shoot 1080p videos, and also has a 1.2 megapixel camera, whereas with the G2, it's packing a respectable 13 megapixel autofocus camera which features an LED flash. You have an aperture of f2.4 with its lens. You have also 1080p video recording, but it has the unique ability to do it at 60 frames per second, and also includes optical image stabilization. So what we've got here is the Windows Phone 8 with the GDR3 update running in the Nokia Lumia 1520 versus a customized Android 4.2.2 Jelly Bean experience on the G2. Now they have their pros and strengths. The Android experience, of course, adheres to power users, and we definitely noticed that a lot more features in tow with the G2 over its rival. The nice thing about the Lumia 1520 and Windows Phone 8 is the start screen here. It aggregates all our content and the live tiles. It gives it a very nice, dynamic, and animated look, and it's just very pleasant that it features a lot of useful animations, and you can see how the modern UI extends to various hubs. In contrast, the Android experience of the G2 provides us with more personalization elements, so you can add in different widgets, you have control in the way you have the on-screen buttons laid out, and of course it's also filled with some very neat animations going on, which gives it a really nice touch to the overall presentation value. Multitasking is a beast with the G2, just because with Windows Phone 8, all we have to do is just hold down the back button, and from here we can just jump in and out of applications. So it's more like task switching than multitasking. Versus with the G2, you could utilize various things. For example, you have all the different Q-Slide applications above here, and the nice thing about it is that it layers it on top of whatever we're doing, and it just offers some really neat functionality. And of course, you could change the translucency of each one of them so you have better visibility. On top of that, you also have the slide aside feature. So basically, you could use 3 fingers to save up to 3 different applications, so that you could go back and actually access them at any time by swiping to the right. Productivity conscious users will really appreciate what these two handsets offer. So with the Lumia 1520, it benefits by giving us the full Microsoft Office experience, so we could create Word documents and Excel spreadsheets while also being able to view PowerPoint presentations, and those are again directly from Microsoft. Now, it might not have the actual Office application, but as an alternative, you have Polaris Office 5 available to us here at the G2, so it's a great option. And on top of that, you have all the cool note-taking features of the experience. And then you have the personal voice digital assistant services. You have the Bing experience here with the Lumia 1520, which is pretty basic in what it can do. It doesn't have the extensive features that we find with the Google Now experience over on the G2. Being high-end smartphones and all, it's wonderful to know that they're powered by the latest piece of technology. So they're both using a quad-core 2.2 GHz Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 processor coupled with 2 GB of RAM and the Adreno 330 GPU. For the Lumia 1520, it offers a very consistent performance. It rarely shows any lag. It has that nice fluid motions with pretty much everything it does, and it barely exhibits any lag. Meanwhile, we just find the G2 to be the more snappy device between the two, just because it just has a very intensive performance in everything that it does. Not surprisingly, they handle high-definition videos with barely any issues whatsoever. On top of that, they also support a lot of different video codecs out of the box. The neat thing about the G2 is that we have the ability to actually layer the video on top of something else, so it's better for multitasking. We talked about it before in other comparisons, but we're going to reiterate it here again. So with the Lumia 1520, it really stands out with its camera UI just because it mimics the styling of a traditional point and shoot. We have controls for different things such as the white balance, the ISO, shutter speed, and the exposure. But the cool thing about it is that we have the ability to also adjust the focus, which is pretty neat and one of the few phones to offer that. But the thing about it, it's lacking built-in shooting modes. We got to use a separate application to apply different filters and effects to our shots. You can't count out the LG G2 just because the camera app incorporates both shooting modes and manual control, so we could adjust things like the ISO, the white balance, and even the brightness if we want to. On top of that, it just lays claim to a lot of very cool shooting modes right out of the box, so we don't have to go to a separate app. Everything's just included with the camera UI. You're not going to be disappointed by the camera performance out of these two handsets. They deliver very sharp and stunning looking photos. So you have the 20 megapixel pure view camera of the Lumia 1520 versus the 13 megapixel autofocus camera of the LG G2. Now they're able to capture a lot of sharp looking details. The color reproduction sometimes get this purplish fringe with the Lumia 1520, but for the most part it still produces a very vibrant color reproduction. Both very nice on the two handsets here. However, those 19 megapixel high resolution samples from the Lumia 1520 really outmuscles the detail quality put out by the LG G2's 13 megapixel autofocus camera. And this is a pretty good case scenario here. So you could see with the G2, it still takes some sharp looking photos, but those 19 megapixel samples here with the Lumia 1520, we're able to exactly see a lot more of those fine details. We're also impressed how they behave under lower lighting situations. They still take some amazing looking photos. Now between the two, it just seems like the G2 shots are a little bit brighter than that of the Lumia 1520. It could be due to just the longer exposure time, but with that though, sometimes it just misses out on some of the details. It just tends to cast a little bit of an overexposed look, so sometimes it just doesn't quite capture as much of the same details, but nevertheless, still nice with the two handsets, and their LED flashes work pretty well. They're also very potent even in far distances. It's a slight win for the Lumia 1520 when it comes to still image quality, but it's a clear victory for the G2 when it comes to shooting 1080p videos. We just prefer its quality over the Lumia 1520. 1520, it's just subdued with its poor details, whereas with the G2, we're really captured by the amount of clarity it's able to produce. On top of that, it shoots at 60 frames per second, so it has a nice fluid-like look. With the Lumia 1520, we have the options of shooting in either 30, 24, or 25 frames per second, which is great for variety, but overall, it's still lackluster with the quality when compared to its rival. Neither handset's actually a strong performer when it comes to call quality. They're nothing more than average. Now with the Lumia 1520, its earpiece just sounds a lot weaker than the G2. G2, even in the middle setting, we're able to sufficiently hear voices, but every now and then on both handsets we might have some distortion, but for the most part we're still able to carry on with our conversations. The larger battery of the Lumia 1520 benefits the handset by giving it the longer battery life. In our experience, on heavy usage, we're able to get close to a day and a half versus the single day of usage from the G2. Now that's partly because the Lumia 1520 is packing a larger size 3400 milliamp hour battery versus the 3000 milliamp hour one in the G2. Now here is where it gets a little bit interesting. Lumia 1520, $100 2-year contract. LG G2, $200 with a 2-year contract. You're just gonna save half the money picking up the Nokia Lumia 1520. At the same time, doesn't really find any compromises in the specs department. Still packing the same processor. It has a gigantic screen, and obviously the camera is also top notch. So why would anyone want to go with the LG G2 knowing that it's $100 more than the Lumia 1520? For starters, it has an IR blaster, so it doubles as a universal remote. You have also the ability to get video app functionality with the native adapter. And finally, the biggest differentiator here is just the software experience. It's far more comprehensive than what you get with the Windows Phone 8 experience out of the Lumia 1520. So that's partly the reason why you want to go with this one. It really adheres to the needs of power users more than its rival. Naturally, both smartphones are fantastic in their own unique way. If you love big phones, there's no question the Lumia 1520 is going to be the perfect device for you. On top of that, you're going to save the money too at the same time. But if you're a power user and you want just a lot of cool software features and want a high-end smartphone, then the G2 is going to be right up your alley. So if you guys want to learn more about either handsets, you can check out our website, phonearena.com. It's John V. Thanks for watching.